3, 82 or 3. It was one of the first in the state. And we did it in the hopes that we could acquire real estate to establish an industrial park. At the time, the county was in pretty good shape. We had Chrysler with about 4,000 employees, and Modern Fold with several hundred, and Firestone with a few hundred, and what have you. But at any rate, we decided to attempt to acquire real estate. There was a parcel of ground south of town on State Road 3 between Newcastle and Interstate 70 that became available as a consequence of a bankruptcy. And at the time, we had 4 functioning major financial institutions in Newcastle that essentially on a handshake said, we'll each bear a fourth of the loan. You go bid it in, whatever it takes, and we'll each put up a fourth of the money, and then you can sign a note and a real estate mortgage to secure the debt and go on down the road. One of the questions that Heidi asked me, I think yesterday, was, and how was it that our redevelopment commission intended to repay that loan? Well, we were going to do it out of land sales. Once we acquired the ground for like $500,000, and eventually, and by eventually I mean 4, 6, 8 months later, we signed a note and mortgage, but so it was a pretty loose deal. Once we acquired it, we learned that not only was this ground that we bought a cornfield, it was a very poorly drained one. And so we had to get a grant from the U.S. Department of Agriculture to drain it. I don't know how many of you have ever attempted to get a grant from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, but when they're moving at capacity speed, you got to put stakes down to see if they're moving. It was one of the most long, drawn-out processes I've ever been through. But we got the money. We contributed the money to the county so that the county surveyor and drainage board could do their job, get it drained, and now it drains for the most part. We then attracted a company to the community that was an affiliate of Coca-Cola, called Winkler Flexible Products out of Wisconsin. They make the plastic sporks, spoons with prongs that sporks. At any rate, and we used economic development bonds, isn't that what they are, to finance that. I think it was the only bond issue that the Economic Development Commission ever put together. We landed them. So now we've got something in the park, and things are going well, and we're in a position to start doing some things with infrastructure. We landed, we attempted to bring more companies to the community and to use TIF financing as the tool. And eventually we got a couple of companies in there with TIF bonds. We had designated the whole park, 160 acres, as a blighted area at that time so that we could capture the tax revenue on the increase. If you don't have debt service that eats all that up, you can develop a savings account, in effect, of funds to be used for the benefit of your economic development area. It can't be used for anywhere in the county. It can only be used for that area that's in the economic development area. Well, from that beginning, we have financed, I want to say, 2 major projects with TIF bonds. One definitely major project with TIF bonds. And the money that has come in as a result of the tax increment has been sufficient to support the bond, the debt service on the bonds with money left over. as a consequence of which, since we started this in the early 80s, we have acquired 390 some acres of real estate. We have sold 200 and some, such that we have 165 acres still available for development. And we have 67 other acres under option to purchase to use for industrial development. And that's in the initial area. What you see up, yeah, there. That's the This is the area that I thought I was bankrupt. We bid out of the bankruptcy. That's an old Indiana highway by the way through this. At any rate, that's what we originally bought, the 160. With the money we've been able to accumulate over the years, we now control or have sold what's within the yellow. Additionally, we've had money available to do some things. At the corner, at the intersection of I-70 and State Road 3, thank you. At the intersection of I-70 and State Road 3, we had a motel and restaurant that had become eyesores. Really looked awful. At any rate. So we had adequate funds to buy those properties. We got a favorable deal from First Financial out of Terre Haute. I say that because they were kind to us. So, Terre Haute people. They were very kind to us. They sold us this eyesore that wasn't paying them any money at an advantageous rate. We now own it. We are putting together a marketing plan, or attempting to improve that interchange. Over the course of time, Draper Shade, that's now our leading employer in Henry County, had need to expand a road, County Road 700 South, in order to accommodate deliveries and shipments from its plant, and in order to accommodate an expansion. We TIF'd it. We built the road. We sold TIF bonds. Draper had its improvement. It had its expansion, and they did it all in Henry County. That bond issue, Draper bought the bonds, and a few years later, it became prudent to pay the bonds off, which they did. The TIF area is still a TIF area, and so the taxes being generated are still coming in to be used for economic development projects. I give you that background to let you know that when it came time to purchase the buildings, the eyesores at the intersection of I-70 and State Road 3, which were approximately 2 miles away from this TIF area, this Draper TIF area, the question became, where are we going to get the funds to make the acquisition? Well, can't we use the Draper money that's coming in that we're accumulating? Well, it's 2 miles away. And then our council, with the help of Council Elias Miller, developed what they like to refer to as the SMILE test. And if you are able to make the argument that the expenditure at the intersection of I-70 and State Road 3 will benefit the Draper area, and if you're able to do that with a straight face, it'll pass the SMILE test, and you can go forward. And so that's what we did. Not only did we do that, we determined that the intersection of State Road 109 and I-70, some 8 miles away from the intersection of 3 and 70, had characteristics consistent with our TIF area, our ERA, Economic Redevelopment or Revitalization Area. And so we decided that it would be prudent for the county to consolidate those two areas so that funds generated from the one intersection could be used at the other and vice versa. And we had a very specific project in mind. There's a building that's south of I-70 on 109 between Knightstown and I-70 that's for sale that needs to have city services. City of Knightstown couldn't afford to extend the services. With the TIF money that we're accumulating, we'll be able to finance the services that are needed to make that building more marketable. Why do we want to make it more marketable for a private developer? Employment. And if it's successful, they'll expand, and the tax base will expand, and it'll be good for all. And then finally, the last step we took, I think, is to consolidate the area at 109 and I-70 with the Spiceland area at 3 and I-70, and that development right there, which is about 2 miles north of I-70, so that we now have one consolidated redevelopment, revitalization area, and we're capturing tax on the increment. That captured tax puts us in a position to do a lot of what we hope are a lot of good things for the community. Now, it's taken us 30 years to get here. He's kept me out of jail so far, and so we're just going to keep moving. As a consequence, we have been able to draw some businesses, some industry to the area. Most notably is TS Tech. That's the picture of it in the lower left. It is a supplier of Honda. TS Tech now has an employment of 356 at our plant, and it's expanding. Draper, that I mentioned, has an employment of 524. The employment of all of the other businesses in the original area consists of only about another 100 employees. We started slow, and we don't have the debt service, for example, that Carmel has, but we've got debt service, and we currently have outstanding about $6 million in debt that we need to service with our tax increment money. One of the other things we've been able to do, flip forward, yeah, we've built a shell building. Runabout out of Shelbyville built it for us. If anybody's looking for 50,000 square feet expandable into 200,000 square feet easily, we've got just what you need. It's 2 miles off the interstate. There's a loan on the building of $1.6 million at 5%. Can you imagine that? Industrial financing at 5%. At any rate, we got it. It's 12.6 acres, 32-foot ceilings. If I wasn't in the law business, I'd probably go out and buy it. But it's a great building. And the point of it is, the takeaway is this. 30 years ago, it was all we could do to come up with $2,500 or $3,000 an acre to buy a poorly drained cornfield at that rate. And today, we're in a position to put up a $2 million building and to do it with tax increment financing. So it's a good thing. The next one, that's what I've been telling you about is our County Redevelopment Commission. Jim and I are also members of the City Redevelopment Commission. And as you know, in small town America, we're all kind of, inbred. We all kind of do things on everything that's out there. My partner is the city attorney and set up the City Redevelopment Commission. And what we did there in order to benefit downtown Newcastle, don't know how many of you are familiar with downtown Newcastle, but it's a traditional old downtown. Newcastle had a Chrysler plant. We had the oldest plant in the Chrysler family for a lot of years up until a few years ago. And in order to help our downtown, we established this redevelopment area. And it was literally the downtown. And then Chrysler wanted to spend a lot of money and wanted some help with TIF. And so we needed to establish an area, a TIF area for Chrysler to generate $7.7 million, I think it was. And so what we did was we expanded the downtown TIF area, because if Chrysler's going to do this, we'd like our downtown to benefit from the increment. And so we ran the limits of our downtown TIF area right down the middle of 18th Street, as I recall, for about 2 miles until it arrived at the Chrysler facility, and wrapped all the way around it. Part of the facility was in the county, part of it was in the city, and everything's good, right? Because Chrysler's good for it, and everything's going to be wonderful. And so we're going to have this $7.7 million bond issue and help Chrysler out. Chrysler developed different plans. They decided to sell the Metaldyne. Metaldyne's a good company, a new company, and so we're going to be fine. We're not going to have the $7.7 million, but we're probably going to do some financing for Metaldyne. Well, then Metaldyne filed for bankruptcy, and we considered that a bad thing. And but we weren't on the hook yet because we hadn't issued bonds. Metaldyne then sold to Crown Equipment that's there. Crown Equipment's an excellent company. They make the forklift trucks. It's one of the cleanest operations you'll ever be in your life. At any rate, Crown Equipment is in there now with the employment of 125 employees, not quite the 4,000 Chrysler employees that we had when my wife and I came to town, but nonetheless, 125 good employees, and the facility is in a TIF area. And the facility has been improved while in the TIF area, so there is a tax increment. And so the city is capturing tax from Crown Equipment, which it is using for various industrial projects, various industrial development, economic development projects. So that in essence is what we've done. Crown, it says we've got a 1 million square foot building. We do. But Metaldyne occupied all of it. Crown is not occupying all of it, but Crown has bought it, and I think they're willing to partition off just a small part of it for a tenant. At any rate, we've improved our lot in those two particulars as a result of using TIF. And the takeaway of all this, I think, is a couple things. TIF is good. In order to do it right, and not get in trouble with the authorities, rely on your council and your economic development people. This new shell building, we wouldn't have built it. We would have been too antsy about building it. We're a pretty cautious lot. Had we not had the help of Umbaugh, who sat down with us, walked us through it step by step to show that we can afford it. And with that knowledge, we've gone forward. So rely on your experts and go forward as fast as you can.
Jennings building?
No.
The Jennings building? You want to talk about it?
Want me to talk about the
Jennings
Jennings?
building?
Sure.
Good morning. Scotty and I walked in. I figure none of you know either Scotty or I. We walked into into the main lobby this morning, and some guy who knows Scott walked up to him and says, "Hi, Scott, how are you doing? Saw you were on the docket today. I'm leaving." So I figure none of you know either of us. As As Lauren said, I've had the honor and the pleasure of representing the Henry County Redevelopment Commission for a number of years, and Scott has been the able chairman, president of that commission, and it's often fun to be his lawyer. He and I drew the short straws, and his partner, the city attorney, decided, since we knew something about the county redevelopment commission, we would be good candidates to serve on the Newcastle RDC. And that has been now in place maybe 10 years or so. They came late to this, but as a result of the efforts that Scott has just described and the increment that has been able to be captured from the increase in property taxes, we have been able to acquire a landmark building downtown. We were able to spend the money to make it secure, which included cleaning it out. It had been fully occupied by pigeons and other non-paying but depositing tenants. It has a new roof, it has new windows, and is ready for a developer to buy it and develop it. And that is in the process of occurring, with the city working very hard in helping this developer acquire the tax credits from the state that will enable them to then spend the money to develop, and our downtown hopefully then will have some activity that it would not otherwise have had. If I can go back just a second, Scott talked about the TS Tech, the Honda supplier that Henry County and Newcastle landed. When we had the opportunity to do that, we had an option on that part of what is now the industrial park. We had to work very closely with the city government and the county government and put together a plan that would enable us to finance the construction of the roads, and the infrastructure to service the TS Tech plant if we could get it. That happened. The road, the utilities, all came about because we were able to utilize the increment and borrow against it with the sale of bonds and spend that money for that purpose and get it done very quickly. And as a result, the TS Tech plant is there, and 300 jobs that were not there are in Henry County. That plant has resulted in a satellite provider of services to TS Tech. Their trucking folks have located in the industrial park. So it's been a very good tool for our Economic Development Corporation president to be able to utilize to compete for these opportunities that don't come along very often.
We're going to start with, on your page 18, slide 35, procedures for establishing an area to implement tax increment financing.
He needs that.
You'll have to share this.
Here's the mic if you need it.
Henry County has a redevelopment commission. that's a division of the county government. It's established initially by the county commissioners, the county executive. It has a 5-member board appointed for 1-year terms and until they're replaced. And I would preface all of this with saying that all of this is with the guidance of a financial advisor and a bond counsel who are leading the local officials through this process. A redevelopment or economic development plan is prepared. The redevelopment commission adopts a declaratory resolution, plan, and factual report that is submitted to the plan commission. The plan commission determines whether the development plan is consistent with the plans for in the county under the planning commission's plans. The county council then approves the plan commission order. Notice is published and a public hearing held in accordance with the Indiana laws, and an impact statement is distributed. The redevelopment commission then holds a public hearing and adopts a confirmatory resolution. The county council, the county commissioners approve the creation of this area, the EDA, and those resolutions are recorded. The DLGF is notified and documents filed with the county auditor. That process then establishes the redevelopment commission.
And one thing of note too is that when an area, if it's going to be expanded, there used to be a shortcut if the area was going to be expanded less than 20%. Now, any area that's expanded, any changes that are made to the plan have to go through this same process with these various steps, these different bodies that have to approve things, and a public hearing, just so you're aware of that. And then another important note is that what we've seen sometimes is where areas have been established and the documents haven't actually made it to the auditor's office. I'm sure some of you have experienced that. If you're ever just seeing these notices go by, and you may want to actually contact somebody if you haven't gotten enough information, well, the information, all the records, but plus just the information, especially that you're going to need to set up the area and all the parcels and so forth. And it's good to always make sure to hold on to the legal description of the area and the maps, so that if you ever have questions about those original boundaries that were established or the expansion and which parcel numbers are in there and so forth, that you always have that documentation available. Okay.
Okay, moving along to the detailed part. As far as TIF goes, a TIF allocation area is established and a base date is set the prior March 1 is what sets the base date. The existing assessed value that is within the boundaries of the TIF area when the TIF area is established is what is called the base value. And that cannot be captured as TIF. So that base will always stay as is. And then any increases in assessed value above that, what we call base value, is the incremental assessed value, or you hear it called captured assessed value. So the equation to calculate the incremental assessed value is the current net AV, so the total net assessed value, less or minus the base assessed value gives you the incremental assessed value. That assessed value, they're having a good time over there. Maybe we should do like Red Rover or something to get them over here. Man, sorry ours is not more exciting. So then you take that incremental assessed value times the tax rate divided by 100, and that gives you your TIF revenue that is generated from the TIF area. So I just wanted you to all have that basis.
Can I jump in real quick?
Yes, please. Here.
Let me just- One of the things Heidi just said was that the concept is that we're capturing the growth and assessed value, and that the base stays the same. And we're going to talk a little bit about adjustments to base anyway. But I know that we've heard various people make comments that the base can be affected, and we're going to talk about a couple ways that it can be. So as Heidi's explaining the concept of TIF, with the growth being captured, the base staying the same, that is the concept, and as long as everything is growing, that is the way it works. What happened, there was a number of years where with the way the form works, and we'll talk about those neutralization forms in a moment, where if there was loss to the TIF and the base, that sometimes then the base value actually goes down as well as the TIF. So we're going to talk about that. But I just wanted to point that out because the true concept is that the base really is set at a level, but there are circumstances that can that truly the base goes down because the assessed value really falls, and also the TIF often falls as well, which we've seen more in some of the recent years because of the economy. So I didn't want to not mention that because I know some people are concerned about that. There have been some things that have changed on the form which should mitigate some of that from happening in the future.
So we'll touch on that again once we get to the neutralization section. The next slide, again, for your reference purposes in the future, this is the TIF area maturity. So I get a lot of questions and calls saying, hey, my TIF area was established before July 1st of 1995. When will it expire? So before July 1st, 1995, it actually has an unlimited life, so it never has a sunset period. If it was established before July 1st of 2008, it has a 30-year life. And then if it was established before June 30th of 2008, or after June 30th, 2008, it has a 25-year life after the date of the first obligation that is incurred. So if you have a TIF area that was established after, sorry, that's a typo, June 30th of 2008, then, and you have no bonds that are outstanding, then that TIF area is going to continue until you have an obligation that's actually incurred within that TIF area. And I know it's slightly a gray area, probably legal counsel might tell you otherwise, but yeah. And as far as residential parcels that can be captured, I get this question a lot too. If it's an economic development area, an EDA, residential parcels can be captured if the base date of the area or if the TIF area was established before July 1st of 1995. If after 1995, those residential parcels should not be captured within the TIF area. If it's a redevelopment area or an RDA, the residential parcels can be captured before July 1st of 1997. So there is a difference as far as when the residential parcels can be captured. I know that's a typical question. And please, Calissa is still walking around, so ask away, please. This is your chance.
We're going to come back to that a little bit.
And we'll,
database.
Yeah, we'll come back to that. I'm going to walk through a database here in just the near future. So I just kind of wanted to give you a quick illustration, again, of how TIF works. As you can see here, the black boundaries are the boundaries of the city, town, county, and is what is called the redevelopment district that is established, or EDA. Within that redevelopment district, there is an economic development area or a tax allocation area that is actually established within that district. Only the increase in assessed value within that tax allocation area boundaries, which is the red shaded area, can be captured as TIF. So you can have a redevelopment district set up in your community, but you can have just a portion of that that is a TIF allocation area that is actually capturing the increases in assessed value. And we set up the boundaries sometimes larger than just the allocation area, because if you know in the future that there's going to be an area that you want to set up a TIF area in, the redevelopment district boundaries are already set up, and then you can set up.
But the redevelopment district is the boundaries of the city, town, or county. It's the economic development area or the redevelopment area that might be bigger and differ from the allocation area.
Yeah. So just another illustration here. So this is just an example. Say you have an allocation area and you have a barn or a structure that's located within the allocation area before any new construction happens. So this assessed value that's within these boundaries makes up the base value of the TIF area. So if you take the base, the current net assessed value in that area times the tax rate divided by 100, that's the total amount of taxes that is distributed to all of your overlapping taxing units, which is the county, school, library, city, townships, et cetera. And then after new construction happens within the same boundaries of the TIF area, that would be the increase from your base assessed value. So that increase is the incremental assessed value, and then you take that times the tax rate divided by 100, and that gives you your TIF taxes. And your TIF goes into a separate redevelopment commission allocation fund, and those monies can be used within or in serving or benefiting this area. But the assessed value from the barn that we show here, that is still your base value. So if you take that base value times tax rate divided by 100, those taxes are still going to the overlapping taxing units within that TIF area. So just the increase is going into the TIF fund. What was in the base is going to all of the overlapping taxing units. I know Lauren kind of hit on some of this before, but just a few ways that TIF can reduce your property tax rates is that some of the assessed value that is the incremental assessed value can actually be passed through to the overlapping taxing units. And we'll come back to the deadline of when the pass-through letter has to be submitted. Let's see. If any of the improvements are funded through bonds, and then once the bonds retire, that new assessed value becomes a part of the tax base. So that helps the tax base of the whole community. And again, if any TIF areas are created after July 2008, they have a 25-year life. We already touched on that. So we'll move on. Lauren also talked about this too, that any increase in assessed value from any new developments, if they would not happen but for the TIF being established, then you can't necessarily say that the assessed value, or that it was lost to the other taxing unit. The increase in assessed value was lost to the other taxing units, because if the TIF was not there, then the increase in assessed value would not have occurred. And then I think we hit on this before too, that the TIF postpones adding new assessed value to the tax base because it's being captured for a certain amount of years. You want to see it? Let me move on. How does TIF take away from funds from our school? The state has actually taken over the funding of the school general funds, as you guys probably are all very aware. It does affect, it postpones increases in revenues to the capital projects funds. And it postpones any reductions to tax rates for funds with any type of levy limitations.
So I guess the important thing, is this working? With schools is that it would be, a school can't generally say that the TIF is hurting their funding their teachers' salaries, because the teachers' salaries, as Heidi was just saying, that are funded through their general fund, which is funded through state funding and not property taxes. So That's probably an exaggeration. However, schools can be impacted somewhat from TIF because, as Heidi just said, the capital project fund, if the assessed value, and that gets into that whole argument of if the development wasn't going to be there anyway, then none of their funds are affected. But if sometimes when you get development, then there's some additional development that occurs, and sometimes they'll say, well, we would have gotten that value, and so in that gray area, some of their funds could be affected, and that is that if that assessed value isn't going toward their tax base, then their capital project fund rate, they won't generate as much revenue. And there are cases where schools and redevelopment commissions have found joint projects where they've been able to actually use some of the tax increment that would have been lost from their capital project fund to do certain projects that have helped the community and the school, where they can kind of make that finding about economic development. So there's it's good to have the dialogue with schools between the redevelopment commissions and the schools to try and make it work best. But again, it goes back to that same argument that we started with, which is if there isn't growth, to stimulate that growth, there is going to have to be some sacrifice normally from all the taxing units. Then just kind of jumping into the risks. Oh, I'm just going to go on.
Yeah.
There are risks with TIF, and we mentioned that particularly in light of financing. So when a TIF area is created, and a lot of times when the financing is put in place, if there is going to be bonds issued, if there's going to be something in anticipation of companies putting in their investment, if the financing is done up front, well then whoever's going to buy those bonds that are going to be payable from these taxes of something that's not even built is taking some risk. And we've seen cases where generally we've been pretty fortunate in that what has been said was going to be built was built, and that revenue's been there to pay bonds. But there are times where something could go wrong and the company doesn't build what they say, or the developer runs out of funds, or doesn't build, or it's not assessed at the level that we thought it was going to be, or it's built and then something could happen, a fire, a tornado could destroy that property. So there are a lot of times when we get into a tax increment financing, the takeaway here is just that there are options and there's extra security that is normally needed in conjunction with a tax increment financing bond. And the other thing that's important, it's just important for you to sort of sink in that the TIF calculation, although it's a pain for most of you, it is so important that it's right, because the tax increment is what is going to be paying back these bonds that are outstanding for these communities, the county, the city, the town. So it's a pretty serious matter as far as getting the revenue correct. And I know sometimes we know how hard it is if you're in the middle of trying to certify your assessed values and neutralizations and all that stuff to really think about that, but it really is important for the revenue stream. And just generally some of the things that affect tax increment, the bonds can be taxable, they can be tax exempt. I mentioned the security. So oftentimes you'll see with TIF bonds might be secured by a company guarantee. They might be, in some cases, the company actually buys those bonds, which actually provides a good security for a community, because the risk is all on the company paying, and if the TIF doesn't come in like it's estimated, the company basically takes the risk of either, if they own the bonds, not getting paid back, or if they're guaranteeing them, that they pay the difference. So many TIF financings, when it's a single company or a single developer, you'll see them secured that way. And then there's other types of bonds that are payable from TIF, but they may have another revenue source to help pay. So sometimes you'll see a TIF combined with an EDIT, economic development income tax revenue, or you may see TIF combined with sewer revenues, or you may see TIF combined with a property tax backup on the redevelopment district. So if the TIF was insufficient, an actual levy would be made on all the taxpayers in the redevelopment district, which could be the city or the county, depending on which redevelopment district we're talking about, and the issuer. So there are a number of ways that this risk has to be mitigated in order to get the bonds to be marketable. Some communities will do the backup, what we call the backup of the property taxes, when the project is something that's particularly benefiting the wider community. So if they're financing roads that are going to benefit not just that one business, but really help a whole area of town, sometimes the community is willing to pay those bonds from the TIF, but back it up if there was a shortfall with the tax levy of, it's called the special benefits tax on the redevelopment district. There's a variety of bonds. I won't get into that, but just so you're aware, there's different types of bonds, and we've got a little summary here in the handout. And then just real quick, the TIF, sometimes we get that question, and we've mentioned it earlier, can TIF and tax abatement be used at the same time? And the answer is yes, but the project has to be sizable enough for that to make sense. So, and just to provide an example, if, let's say we had a company that was going to do a $100 million investment, if there was no tax abatement involved, then the revenue stream is larger, right? Because the company's paying the full amount of taxes, there's no phase-in. So then, when we're doing the tax increment, there's actually more tax increment revenue generated. So in this case, with this example, the bond issue could generate about $5.8 million of bond proceeds, which would then be used for the incentive, for putting in the roads, et cetera. And then if we put a 10-year abatement on that same $100 million of investment, what you see how the revenue that's available now is coming, it's being phased in. So there's less revenue in those early years because of the abatement. There's more revenue in the later years because the abatements were ending. And you can see that then, even though we still have that TIF revenue stream that we're going to capture and pay back the bonds, it's a lesser stream. And so it supports a lesser bond issue. And so the amount of proceeds that were available from this TIF bond were only $3.5 million. Now, in this case, let's say the company, they got the benefit of the abatement, and then there was less funding available up front to do the incentive or the roads or whatever was needed. So oftentimes, it's just important to know that there's sort of a trade-off that happens if there's going to be TIF and tax abatement, and sometimes the community, your economic development folks, may be talking to a company, and they may kind of make that an option to the company. You know, we're willing to give you some amount of tax abatement and some amount of TIF to help attract you to locate here, and we're going to let you help decide, because some companies may want more of the break on the abatement and they don't care about other capital incentives, and some companies may not care about the tax abatement for operating in the future, and they may want more intense incentive up front with the TIF. So that's just to help you understand that. There's other examples in here where, again, we're not going to go through these given our time and probably your interest, but there's a page here which just has some different examples of projects that were done around the state, and these are what I call single company, where they were guaranteed or bought, these bonds were bought by the company or guaranteed by the company. And then there's some examples from some other communities where they've done a variety of things. The town of Plainfield has done TIF in a variety of ways. They've funded a lot of infrastructure. They've leveraged a lot of federal grants with their TIF. And in some cases, if it's a developer-driven TIF, they will not guarantee it. But if it's, sometimes there's communities where, if, like I mentioned, if there's roads, particular roads that they're going to fund anyway, they might be willing to back that up. And then I had mentioned earlier clawbacks, and I do like to point this out when I'm talking about Plainfield, because they had a company, their homegrown company was Galleons Sporting Goods. I don't know if you remember Galleons, but Galleons, they were trying to keep them and have them build a corporate headquarters in Plainfield, and so they helped to use TIF to reduce basically the payments that the Galleons would make, so they would put a corporate headquarters building in Plainfield. And there was extensive negotiations about what the clawbacks would be if they didn't stay there and if they got bought out and all kinds of things. And within a few weeks after everything was done, the bonds were issued, Galleons got bought out by Dick's Sporting Goods. And so the clawback provision came up, and Dick's honored that clawback, and they paid the town $7 million because they took over that. And that $7 million then became available to pay off that financing and also do some additional improvements. So it can be very important, and that's why I just like to bring that up. All right, and then we've talked about how TIF can be used for these roads and have backups. So we're going to end by jumping into, I'm going to skip over this too, get us into our reporting requirements. Yes.
Andrew, did you want to say something, or were you just sitting in? Okay. Okay, just checking. Okay, so the TIF annual reporting requirements, we're going to jump into, we just wanted to give you all an example of a TIF database. So when we call asking for a TIF database, you kind of have an idea of what we are even talking about. So it's a parcel list Excel spreadsheet typically that your computer systems can generate. And the format that we like to see is we have laid out here, but just kind of wanted to show you and kind of walk you through just quickly how it works. So you obviously have all the parcels listed, and then we have the base assessed value, and then the gross assessed value. Sometimes we have land and improvements also shown. So then you have your exemptions, deductions, and then you have your net assessed value, which is gross minus exemptions, deductions to get you to the net. And so how the TIF calculation works, in some of your systems, some of your databases show this, and some of your systems do it kind of behind the scenes, and it doesn't come up on the typical database that we request for. But there is what we call an AV gross loss, restored loss calculation, and that's the next 4 columns. So you can see we have highlighted in green those 3 parcels actually grew in assessed value from their base. So if you, for like parcel number 2, it went from $25,000 at the base to $200,000 at the net. So that parcel actually grew $175,000. So all of the parcels that are shaded in green grew, but the 2 parcels that are shaded in red actually decreased. And so the calculation that takes place behind the scenes is that those growth in losses in assessed value on each individual parcel have to be allocated amongst the other parcels so that you can get an incremental assessed value that is positive. If that makes sense. So you can see on parcel 2 that the true increment is 175,000, but once you take into consideration the growth and losses in all of the TIF parcels in the database, it's actually 141,000 on that particular parcel. But if you look in total, that incremental assessed value is 425,000, which is the 1.275, the total net AV minus the base AV. So it actually spreads the increases and decreases within the area amongst the other parcels within that TIF area. That makes sense. So like I said, some of this does not show on your databases, and it's just something important to know and be aware of. That's how it's being calculated. Okay, moving along. So we wanted to lay out all of the TIF reporting requirements for you because since there were some changes this year. So I'm just going to walk through the different deadlines of the various reports that are required and your different responsibilities. So the first reporting requirement is March 15th. This year, that March 15th deadline was actually January 31st. So starting in 14 and thereafter, the deadline is going to be March 15th. And that is the report that the Redevelopment Commission puts together. There's no prescribed form on Gateway. The information just must include information on the Redevelopment Commission members and employees, the expenditures within the TIF area, the revenue within the TIF area, and then the fund balances within the TIF area as of 12/31 of 12. That report, as you are all probably aware, was just downloaded into Gateway as one PDF document. So again, there was not any form like step-by-step process in Gateway that you had to walk through for that reporting requirement. And I think eventually they'll probably get to that point where it's all hopefully streamlined. But it was just one big PDF document that had to be uploaded into Gateway. And the Redevelopment Commission is responsible for completing and uploading that information. So for that reporting requirement, you guys, as requested, I should say, don't have to really do very much with that report because the Redevelopment Commission has access to actually upload that document. So some counties, the Redevelopment Commissions might ask the auditors to upload that information. It probably varies a little bit amongst the communities, but. Okay, moving along is the July 15th deadline. So the July 15th deadline is what we call the TIF excess notification letters or TIF pass-through letters that you're probably all aware of. So by July 15th, the Redevelopment Commission has to determine whether or not any of their incremental assessed value will be passed through to the overlapping taxing units in that unit. And the Redevelopment Commission has to provide written notice to the auditor and all of the overlapping taxing units, whether or not they're going to pass through any assessed value to the overlapping taxing units. So, and please feel free, this is probably a good time to ask any questions if you have it regarding these particular details, but the auditor should always receive a copy of this letter, but again, it's up to the Redevelopment Commissions to actually put the letter together and distribute it to you and to all of the overlapping taxing units. And then once you receive the TIF pass-through letters, those have to be submitted when you guys are certifying your assessed values, which the DLGF probably reminds you of, hopefully. Okay. So that one has been in place for several years now. The next deadline is a new deadline this year, which again, you're probably all aware of. This report is a report on the activities within each TIF area within your county. It is due to, the Redevelopment Commission is supposed to distribute this report to the fiscal body by August 1st, and then to Gateway, or to the DLGF through Gateway by October 1st. So obviously that deadline is approaching us here. That form is on Gateway, and I'm actually going to walk through an example if you are all interested here in just a second. But it includes, for each individual TIF area, the revenues, expenses within 2012, the year-end fund balances of the allocation fund and any bond funds, and that's as of 12/31/12. It includes information on any outstanding obligations, which would be debt. Any debt that's payable from TIF has to be included. It includes the maturity date, amount outstanding, any payments made during the previous calendar year, which for this year would be 2012. And then the infamous list of parcels for each TIF area, which I'm sure you guys all have stories about uploading because I've received a lot of calls. So I'm going to walk through the TIF parcel list real quick here, and then I can walk through an example if you are all interested. So the TIF parcel list is probably the trickiest part of the whole Gateway upload. You have to use the format that the DLGF has given you all, and I'll reference that link here in a second. But the parcel list has to be in the format that I show here, where the county number, or the county column is the county number, so it's your 2-digit county code. The parcel number column is your 18-digit state ID code. This is holding everybody up when you're trying to upload those parcel lists. It will not let you upload it unless it's the 18-digit state ID number. I will tell you, a lot of the computer systems don't generate their TIF databases with the state ID numbers right now. I think some of them have new applications that you can download. I know Thomson Reuters has a new, I don't even know what to call it, software that you can download into your system, and it'll allow you to actually print out the database that the state is requiring here. So be sure to ask your software vendor if they have a format for you already. What else? The property type code is either the letter R or P for real property or personal property. Taxpayer name is that. The gross assessed value, net assessed value, base AV, and incremental AV, those all come from your TIF database. Those columns all have to be formatted as number. It does not matter if there are commas or not commas. The DLGF, they said it does not matter. And then you need one Excel file per TIF area. You cannot have multiple TIF areas with one Excel file. It won't let you upload it. And another thing that's been holding a lot of communities up is that within each Excel file, the tab name for each TIF database has to be capital TIF. If your tab name in the actual Excel file is not TIF, it won't even let you upload it. It seems ridiculous, but it's just something that keeps catching people up. So if you try to go to upload your parcel list and it's kicking back an error, I would check your parcel ID, your state parcel ID numbers to make sure it's 18 digits. For personal property, I think it's a 12-digit number. Starts with your county code. And then make sure that your tab name is TIF. And those two things, like I said, have been holding people up the most. Have anybody experienced any other issues that you want to talk to or let everybody else know? Dawn, in the back.
The only issue that we had with that was on all of our Excel files, we had a total for the assessment.
Oh, yes, yes.
We had to remove it.
Yes, great point. Yeah, so no totals, no extra columns like above county parcel, above this gray level, there should be nothing, no TIF area name or anything. So the Excel file name can be whatever you want it to be, and that's how you're gonna have to distinguish that that parcel list is for that particular area. But yeah, good point. Thanks. Anybody else have unique things like that? Allen County?
I was just going to mention one yesterday, I talked with Colby, and even if you put a space after the P or the R or the property type code, it will reject the file. I'm just going to go back and delete
Yeah.
the space. So it is very stingy on what it is.
Yes.
letting-
And supposedly all of this information is flowing into this big database that they're putting together. So that's why it's very particular on its format. Any other questions with that? The TIF parcel list? Yeah? So this report it was supposed to be submitted in some format, however you wanted it to be, to the fiscal body, so your county council, city, town councils, by August 1st. That same report has to be uploaded into Gateway by October 1st.
But the form that was done in August, that report didn't really have to have a format. I mean, it had to
Yes.
have this information. But the gateway filing obviously is very specific, and you input the information, just as Heidi was showing.
Yeah. Calissa, can you bring her their mic? Sorry.
And this is what the auditor does, not the redevelopment commission.
Okay, so on this slide, good segue. I have some links up here on this slide of the Gateway website where you can log into Gateway, and then the DLGF's TIF management portal, which has guidelines, a step-by-step guideline on how to actually fill in the Gateway report. So that's a good link to have. As far as the auditor's responsibility with this report, if it is a county TIF area, you are the fiscal body representative to upload any information into Gateway. So you will be the person that uploads any of the county TIF areas into Gateway. But the city and towns, it's the clerk treasurers or controllers that actually have to upload this information into Gateway. We had one community, I won't call them out, that the county auditor went in for the city and started to set up the information, but so then the clerk treasurer couldn't actually get in and set it up. So it won't even allow you to get into it if somebody else has even been in there to get things set up. So,
Finicky.
yeah. And then if for all of the TIF areas, then the cities and towns will ask you to provide a TIF parcel listing, the TIF parcel listings that I just was discussing. Okay, by the number of hands, does anybody want me to actually get on the Gateway portal and walk through an example? Anybody else?
We could do that after, maybe? I mean, toward
We can.
ask him.
Do you want to, would you guys want to, if there are a lot of you, then I can touch base on it maybe at the very end, or if you just want to stick around, I can just walk through a specific example with you? Okay, well, we'll just hit it at the very, very end, so once we wrap up, then if whoever wants to stay and walk through the example, then we'll do that. Is that good? Okay, any other questions regarding this report, just kind of in general?
And probably I just want to add real quick that part of the reason that this is happening, and unfortunately always these burdens fall on the county auditors, but it's really part of the whole transparency movement that you're all aware of, that the officials want more transparency with TIF, the legislatures, the taxpayers, et cetera. So it's kind of, this has been sort of the result. You know, there's been various proposed legislation for putting additional restrictions and various requirements on TIF. So this has kind of been what's come through in the last year or two. And then it's pretty clear that the DLGF is going to try to, you know, have this information be available, which then will provide better information out there on TIF areas and what TIF's being, you know, what obligations there are and so forth. And the other thing I think that is important to note is that when you're providing revenues and expenditures, this is probably more at the redevelopment commission level, but you might be trying to tell some of your local officials or forewarn them, I guess, that this year they accepted expenditures in a kind of any old way they are available, but they've said that they're going to want them reported by TIF area in the State Board of Accounts type way they're kept, you know, so.
Personal services, 100s, 200s, 300s, 400s.
Yeah, you know that language. So a lot of redevelopment commissions have not been keeping their records that way. And particularly, they may keep it by project. There's just a whole host of the way they've done that. So that might be a big revelation that they're going to have to actually try to keep their expenditures that way. So to the extent that you have contact with your redevelopment commission folks, you might be starting to help encourage them to be tracking their expenditures by TIF area in that level of detail and in those categories, so that if that ends up being in a form, that they'll be able to comply with that, which will then hopefully save you some headaches when that ends up being part of the form.
Yeah, and August 1st and October 1st of next year, you're going to be reporting on what's going on right now. So if there's any way you can start working on your expenses in the 100s, 200s, 300s, if you're not already, you might want to start having discussions with them now if you're the ones that keep the allocation funds, which they probably are. Okay, no further questions on that report. We'll move along to the neutralizations. So the neutralizations, as you all are probably aware, occur right before you are getting ready to certify your assessed values. So after you have entered in, after the assessed values have rolled over to your office, after you've balanced, after you've entered in all deductions, all exemptions, then you're ready to do your TIF neutralization. This has to happen before you certify, or you'll have to recertify. I will just warn you. So basically what TIF neutralization does is that it accounts for any effects in the real property assessment or reassessment or trending. So you do neutralizations only for real property. Personal property is not involved. And basically the form is to neutralize any change in your base assessed value for any trending or reassessment that have occurred within the TIF area. So basically, you're adjusting your base value every year based on what the trend within your TIF area, the assessed values within your TIF area are doing. It accounts, we do take into account any new development that has occurred in the area, so any new construction that has occurred within the TIF area, that is a part of the calculation. Any roll-off of property tax abatements are also into the form and the part of the equation. And any assessed value appeals that you know are going to occur that will affect your TIF area is also taken into consideration on the new form. As you are all probably aware, there is a new form this year that is a little bit more streamlined. I say that with hesitation, don't I? We only do like 300 for clients around the state. So nothing is, vanilla. So
I want to just jump in. So
Yeah.
because again, it's another form that you're faced with, and the concept of neutralization in statute was really that they didn't want TIF to, actually, there used to be 10-year, well, there's still supposed to be 10-year reassessments of property, now it's every 4 years. And they didn't want, when that happened, for TIF to actually get all the gain from the reassessment, which in theory, values would go up when there's a reassessment, which doesn't always happen, but that was the theory. So the idea was that the TIF wouldn't just get all the gain, but it also was supposed to keep TIF from losing also just things that it shouldn't lose, like, for example, when you're doing an adjustment, Heidi mentioned new development. If there's a new development that occurred, that wasn't all base gain either. I mean, it wasn't just natural growth, it was an actual new structure. So that should be noticed in the TIF, and also abatement reductions. And there also needs to be some adjustment for appeals. The old form had this whole secondary component where it could be adjusted to make sure the TIF didn't lose, and that was partly in consideration of the bondholders. Like I mentioned, there's that risk out there, not wanting too much TIF to be lost through this neutralization process. But what started to happen is, and some of you are aware, that then sometimes there was like sort of this over adjustment, which then the base starts losing value, and too much was going to the TIF. The new form is improved probably in the sense that it's less likely to, you're less likely to see any of those super big changes, but there still could be some loss to both. So there may be some loss where you may still see some base going down and some increment going down. It's not going to happen if there's no overall loss, but when there are losses, some of that can affect the base and some of that can affect the TIF. So we just want you to be aware of that, and that is why that form is done. And I know the DLGF and various parties have tried to perfect it, but there's probably never going to be a perfect form because there's lots of little nuances that can't be perfectly adjusted. And just even with appeals, usually when this is being done, not all the appeals are known, and the appeals can play a big part in what happens to the TIF and the base later on when they get resolved. And we have cases where there's appeals that are, from 5 years ago, and all of a sudden maybe they'll process 3 years worth of appeals, and there's tax refunds, and there's all kinds of things. And so there's just nothing that's going to be perfectly able to capture everything that's going on there, especially in these areas with lots of parcels. So it does seem to us that the form is better in terms of you'll see a more fair allocation between base and TIF, but it may not be perfect.
And then just in the neutralization process, it's just important for you all to be aware just kind of what the TIF should be, kind of what to expect out of the TIF area when doing the form. So yeah. And then again, it's your guys' responsibility to actually complete those neutralization forms and submit those to the DLGF before certifying your AVs. So yeah, and like I said, we do probably over 300 forms for clients. And this year too, it was unique. Well, it's still going on, I should say. It's unique because per TIF area, you do one neutralization form now. So say you have a TIF area that's been expanded 2 times. So really that allocation area now has 3 TIF databases. The original area, expansion 1 and expansion 2. Now you're doing one neutralization form for that one allocation area. So you have to basically add those totals for those 3 TIF databases into your one form. So it's complicated, the administration of the actual neutralization form. but something just to be aware of.
And the reason you still have to keep your 3 separate areas, though, is because you have different bases, right?
Yes.
So,
So do not combine your TIF databases because this is the way you're doing the neutralization forms now. They are still supposed to stay separate. I know that's a question I've received a lot from you guys. I was going to walk through the neutralization form. Anyone
save
interested?
yeah.
Save for later too? Okay. We're going to have just a mini session right after this if you want to stay.
Okay.
Okay, any questions on neutralization? No. Okay. Just some additional roles that for you guys, in addition to the prior slides that we were just discussing. Obviously, to manage all of the TIF databases for the TIF areas within the county, tracking any parcel splits within the TIF areas. That's something that needs, again, a good system between the assessor's office and your office, because if there is what I call a mother parcel that's been split into 3 parcels, all 3 of those parcels should still be within the TIF area. Those things get missed all the time, and that's something that, again, you just kind of need to be aware of what's in your areas. And I know some of your areas are huge, and I know some of you have a lot of them, but again, that's what I do for a living.
If the,
Call me crazy.
I think if the assessors, it's one of those connection things that has to occur with the assessor's office and your mapping probably, and yourselves. But I know one of the things that is an issue is where people don't know if it's a TIF area. So to the extent that parcels can be flagged, again, this may vary with software, that so at least they know that there was a parcel when it gets split that the mother parcel was in the TIF area, then that would trigger somebody to notice that there's a split that occurred, and then hopefully they can make sure that they identify that those are TIF parcel splits as well. But that is something, as Heidi said, that we see a lot of parcels that can be missed, and a lot of times the reason it's splitting is because that's where the development's occurring. So it's usually pretty critical to the TIF area to make sure that those parcels are included. So anyway, just enough said, but you get the idea.
Working with the RDCs to track and manage any fund activities for the county TIF areas. That's any TIF allocation funds, which is your TIF fund, where all of your TIF distributions go into. Correctly deposit any TIF revenues that you receive to the allocation funds, make debt service payments as required. Appeal tracking is huge. Again, a system that you guys need to have between your office and the assessor's office. It is imperative for especially the larger TIF areas that have a lot of activity and a lot of appeals going on. That, like Lauren had said, significantly impacts your TIF revenue calculation. So I just highly recommend either having the assessor track those and keeping a good list of where they're at in the process, if they're at the state level or if they're just going through your county PTBO or what level they're at. It impacts your TIF areas. And then with that, the refunds calculation, and when you have refunds that the parcels are within a TIF area, you need to be cognizant of that refund, how much it affects the TIF and how much affects the base. Because if you have a parcel, I wasn't calling you out, Pam, but Pam, we have worked with Pam, and it happens all the time, and I'm not going to call out anybody, but just so you are all very aware of when there's a refund that's received on a parcel, it doesn't all get taken from TIF, or it doesn't all get taken from the base. It needs to be a proportional split between the base and the TIF. So if you take the incremental AV divided by the total net AV, you get a percentage. That's the percentage of the refund that needs to be taken out of the TIF.
Fuel is on, or isn't it, you're reducing, the refund is applied to the value that's being appealed.
Correct.
So if the appeal is on the entire new building that has been all incremented, then it could go to that. If it's on the land and the building, then you would prorate it, but they're all individually unique, correct?
Right.
So you can't just apply that percentage because then you would really be eating in a lot of bases because
Right.
mostly people are appealing new growth.
Right. So you have
Yeah.
to track which you're right, which it's appealing.
Yes. If you have a detailed tracking system like that, that's awesome. And how it should be done. Any questions on that? Okay. Good point, Tara. As far as the auditor's role in economic development projects is just sometimes participating as members of the economic development team, providing any real-time information on the status of funds. We'll sometimes call and be like, how much money is in the TIF allocation fund as of a certain date? We ask for that information often. And then if necessary, being a part of any bond rating calls, just because you're the fiscal body of the county. So if there's a county that's doing a TIF bond issue or whatever type of bond issue it may be that's getting a rating, you might be asked to sit in on the call because you might be the person who knows what's going on fiscally within the county. And then, yeah, providing any information to bond purchasers. And that's the timer. So just with that, just a few things that we have assisted our clients with. And yeah, so any questions anybody has?